on there. All right, welcome everybody to our webinar today. My name is Jason Johnson. I represent the Why Try organization. We are the host of these webinars. This webinar series has been an ongoing project now, going for about 2 years. We started at the beginning of the pandemic, really as a way to stay connected to our network, our community. And then it just kind of took off from there. We've organizationally, we've been around for about 20 years, the Why Try organization. And we kind of specialize in teaching the skills and the sources of resilience, as well as assisting with student wellness. And so this webinar series was a great way to stay connected. And then very quickly, when we started off, and we realized that there was a real sense of community that they contributed to that I think has been rejuvenating for a lot of us that have been able to participate in these, both as panelists and attendees. I feel really fortunate. I'm the lucky one that has been able to moderate, I think, about 98% of these. And it's just an absolute joy in my life. So our topic today that we're going to address, what we do is we typically select a topic that we have some real experts to be able to join as panelists to discuss. And then we shoot for about an hour long discussion, give or take. Sometimes we go a little bit over, depending on the nature of the discussion. Today, we are going to be discussing preparing for college and career readiness and accelerating rural education outcomes. This is an important topic for an important population of students here in this country. And I'm so excited to be able to introduce our panelists. We have two real experts, real advocates in this area. And these two individuals also happen to be real good longtime friends of our organization. And so I'm thrilled to be able to have you both back, Dreama and Hassan, both previous panelists on webinars as well. So this is kind of like that club. If you're a multi-time host on Saturday Night Live, this is a similar club, multi-time panelist. So welcome back, both of you. Let me introduce you both. I'll formally introduce myself, and then we'll get right into the conversation. So first we have Dreama Gentry. Dreama, as the founder, president, and CEO of Partners for Rural Impact, PRI, works to ensure the success of all rural students. Under Gentry's leadership, Partners for Rural Impact has grown from a two-person team working in a single school district to an organization with nearly 500 dedicated team members, deploying resources in communities across the country, just doing incredible work. Through the experience of designing and leading the first Rural Promise neighborhood, Gentry created a place-based cradle-to-career approach for improving outcomes for rural students and communities across the country. It's been shared and adopted by communities from coast to coast. And we are so thrilled to have you, Dreama. Welcome back. How you doing?
It's good to be here with you. Thanks.
Awesome. Next, we have Hassan Davis. Hassan, for more than 25 years, has held to the belief that each child can and will succeed as long as adults in their world create hope. Starting as a counselor and as a teaching artist, and then through years as a youth development specialist, Hassan has transformed the attitudes and strategies of school faculty, staff, parents, and members of the community to help hundreds of children graduate from high school and go on to earn degrees from college and universities. In addition to his work at schools, Hassan has been Commissioner of Juvenile Justice for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, Vice Chair of the Federal Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice, and an organizational consultant. With this experience, he's transformed organizations and public systems to ensure they have the capacity to not only meet the needs of the children and families they serve, but also to be transparent and set metrics and methods of accountability. Welcome, Hassan. Thrilled to have you as well. How you doing?
I'm great, Jason. Good to see you again. Good to be back. Hey, Dreama, good to see you again.
Welcome. the thing I love about these two guests, everybody we have on is, it's a friend, it's somebody that we respect, that we admire, that's an expert in the field. I can say without hesitation that these two individuals are two of the finest examples of what it really means to be a student and a youth advocate that I've ever met. The work that you've done is really admirable, and you're people that continually put your money where your mouth is when it comes to living what you preach and really helping these students out. So I'm so excited for the discussion that I know we're going to have today. I guess I better introduce myself. My name, it says Why Try Webinar. My name's actually Jason Johnson. I'm the director of training and research for the Why Try organization. My background is, by profession, I'm a school psychologist. Worked in public ed as a school psych until about 7 years ago. And then I got pulled over to this world of Why Try, this organization. We kind of bonded over a common approach to resilience. Resilience is my area of expertise. I did research that ended up getting published on the topic of resilience. And that's kind of always been my focus academically, professionally, personally. About 7 years ago, when my path crossed paths with the Why Try organization, we realized we had this common approach to resilience. And so they brought me over, and it's been just an awesome ride. I feel so fortunate that I get to work closely with educators and mental health professionals and people from the world of corrections and juvenile justice throughout the country. Just incredible humans that work in this field. And I'm so grateful to consider you all colleagues, and so excited to be able to participate in the type of conversations that we're going to have today. So with that, let's get into it. I want to just start off maybe having you both tell us a little bit about what your current roles and organizations are, and what you've been really focusing on, working on the last little while, both individually and organizationally. You can take that a lot of different directions, but kind of catch us up with what you've been doing, what you've been focusing on. Let's start first with Dreama, and then hear from Hassan after.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be back here. And I think that if Hassan starts talking, Dreama won't have time to talk. And for all those folks here, Hassan's also my husband. And so I said in there, we have our kid in school in South Dakota. And I was like, I guess I should expound on that. So it's good to be here with Hassan. It's good to be here with you, Jason. So what we've been up to in Kentucky, we have been doing work in Appalachia since 25 years now. But we've been doing that work as part of Berea College, which is where Hassan and I met years ago. It's a great college in Appalachian, Kentucky. If you don't know Berea, you definitely, and Mark, maybe you can put the link to Berea College there, because it's a place our students can go for no tuition. So it's just a phenomenal place. Partners for Rural Impact came out of that. So we're now our own nonprofit organization. We got too big to be a department at the college. And so since May of last year, it's really been setting up sort of the Partners for Rural Impact to do work across the country. And our passion is ensuring the success of kids in rural America, making sure they enter kindergarten ready to learn, they're safe, healthy, and supported, they graduate and transition to post-secondary and career. And so in the chat, people were talking about the Gear Up program. We love Gear Up. Gear Up has really helped us do that work. Communities and schools, and that model is also a phenomenal model that we use. So that's what's been happening with us, is getting all these people that are working in Appalachia transition to this new organization, and also finding other rural places in the country to work.
And in the process, I'll add, you've kind of established yourself as a model, I think, for a lot of rural communities to look at, as far as how you've navigated some of the unique challenges and some of the systems that you've helped build, that I think we'll talk more about here in a little bit, have just been remarkable resources for some communities that have not had the support they've needed historically. Hassan, tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, what your focus has been.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Dreama. So it is, and you have to excuse me, I get excited and 50 million things try to come out at once. What I want to do is I'll start with my result statement. For the last 15 years, I've had a result statement kind of as the thing that guides me. And it's every child safe, supported, and provided a clear path to success in education, in career, and in community life. Every child. And I started in this work, primarily working in schools, doing assemblies, pullouts for young people who were really facing struggles that I could connect with and coach and engage with, professional development for educators. In the last few years, I moved and really recognized that my own battle to navigate all these systems as a young person dealing with poverty, learning disabilities, ADHD and dyslexia, and becoming a self-advocate, and navigating the justice system. I got my first arrest. Well, I got arrested and wound up on probation at 11 years old for the rest of my childhood. And all of those kind of culminated in this fight every day to survive. And Jason mentioned resilience. And so that became that piece, fighting a whole system to not just survive, but to thrive. In the last few years, especially since COVID, I've shifted and realized more than any time in my career how important it is for the adults who serve these young folk who are fighting to receive the kind of support and engagement at a broad level to really help them navigate this world. And so in the last couple of years, Jason, I've developed what I call the Hope Dealer curriculum, or the Hope Engage curriculum. Hope, humanity, optimism, perspective, and empathy, and using those as creative engagement tools to draw adults who work for and with young people and families that are struggling, to see themselves and really center themselves as the ones not making success for them, but being the partner in helping them become successful and owning that. And as we navigate these difficult last few years in particular, how do we fill ourselves up so that we can pour into and draw out of the folk we serve the very best possible? So I've been doing a lot of that. Still a lot of conference speaking. Chris, I'm in South Dakota next month at the state special education conference, and I've been doing a lot more work with special education, vocational rehab, and disability support services, both in government agencies and private agencies, really helping build those tools to make sure that all means all. And it's been exciting, and my brain is rolling. So I'm going to stop there because we'll just go into conversation. But that is some of the exciting things that have been going on.
I love it. You have every right to be excited about that. That's really good, really important stuff. I love what you were mentioning, your realization and your shift in trying to help the adults keep themselves rejuvenated. The research on resilience is really clear. You can go back 40 years of resilience research, and the most consistent protective factor that shows up when you look at kiddos that rank high on resilience scales is the presence of at least one caring adult. And it's so vital. That's such a vital piece. You're speaking my language. I'm wondering if we can jump over and just have you address briefly what you're currently seeing. The last 2 years has been interesting, I think, for a lot of us in this world, where we've seen certain challenges remain the same, and then we've seen other challenges kind of percolate up to the surface that maybe had been bubbling underneath, but maybe hadn't been being addressed as directly. What are you seeing right now as the critical issues that youth are currently facing, particularly the youth that you're supporting, that you're serving? Maybe talk a little bit about those, what's changed, what's kind of remained the same, and where your focus has been in that regard. Let's just go in the same order. Let's go Dreama and then Hassan.
Or we can jump in. We're pretty good at talking over each other too. So
Perfect.
we can also jump in. And I do think, Jason and Hassan spends a lot more time with young people and those that work closely with young people than I have the privilege to doing now. I do think one thing we have to continue to think about is how do we continue to support young people through all that's happening with them, right? This pandemic, multiple pandemics, right? All these different pieces that are going on, but how do we also try to change the systems too? And so I think one of the things that I'm spending my time on is thinking about how do we continue to center young people in policy discussions, in investment discussions, and particularly rural young people, because philanthropy is forgotten about rural America. I think our politicians are so busy trying to get at the news bites and are becoming so polarized that they're forgetting that their purpose is to ensure that every young person in this great nation is supported. So I do think a large part of the work that we're doing at Partners for Rural Impact is visiting people across the country to say, you know, you're in rural America, you're supporting these young folks. How do we come together across regions of this country to share with our policymakers, to share with funders and investors that we know what works, right? It is that one caring adult, right? It is these programs that support resilience. But how do we also get the investment and stuff? Because, you know, people shouldn't have to be so damn resilient, right? And I think that's the other piece is, yes, resiliency is important, but we also have to be creating a nation that is supporting young people so that we can actually work ourselves out of some of this resiliency work. But that's sort of how I'm spending my time. Hassan's spending a lot of time thinking about the here and the now, and how do we serve kids today, especially in rural America.
Yeah, thanks, Dream. And, you know, I think that when I think about all of the things, I mean, the things that are always challenging young folk, mental health, trauma, adverse childhood experiences, navigating a world that is more unsure now than any other time in my experience. I remember at some point in the last 15 years thinking we, you know, capital W, we, all of us amazing adults had finally taken so many barriers out of the way of children. In the last few years, it's like, oh, maybe not, right? And so I think there are a lot of things that we thought we had resolved. The words that come to mind when I think about the struggle is dignity, belonging, and mattering. And those are the pieces as I weave conversations with young people to help them find a place and realize they have a right to basic dignity, no matter where they came from, what their zip code, whether they come from the holler or they come from the hood. There's a core humanity that they ought to own and expect to have value with. Belonging is that hard piece that we're dealing with, where young people aren't just invited in. We talk about inclusion. Inclusion means opening the door. Belonging means giving you the key to the door, letting you know that this is your space to show up in anytime you want, not just when we're here to authorize it or welcome you or tell you which corner to be in. And then mattering is that next level where we do have to get that mental health piece in and that strong resilience piece where people, they actually see that they are contributing. One of the things that I've seen and been amazed by in Dream's growth from her and a half-time secretary in an 8x5 office, you're right, to her and 500 staff serving, you know, 50, 80,000 kids over, you know, this large swath, is their ability to engage and create space where young people have voice. And I think more and more now, that is such an important part of what we have to do. There's a statement that comes up a lot in my workshops, you know, nothing about us without us. And that crosses across conversations of race, conversations of youth engagement, conversation, what it means to be rural, what it means, you know. And so for us in the work, we have to be more courageous in knowing that even if the voice is not polished and it may be abrasive because it may hurt our feelings, if we're not listening to and inviting young folk into the conversations of what is our best work to make them, right, feel dignified, feel like they belong, and believe that they matter, then we will absolutely fail this group of folk that are dependent on us to help them, not lead them, but to help them find their own voice and leadership.
And I think one way we're realizing with young people is also inviting them into the discussion to reimagine their community and their place.
Mm-hmm.
I think often we center the discussions around what do you think we could do for you all as young people? So we're actually doing an initiative right now in 3 distinct rural Appalachia, the Houma Nation in Louisiana, and then Laramie, Wyoming, where we're actually using art and local artists to lead those young people through and let the young people re-envision place and re-envision what rural America could look like, a rural America they would want to live in and be a part of, right? And I think that's the other piece on the student voice is let them come up with the questions and let them come up with the path too.
That's awesome. It's given me goosebumps hearing you talk about it. I hearing you talk, you're so aligned with the research around protective factors. One of the ones that shows up a lot as well is like a positive sense of identity and where those come from. And I remember, I'll have to see if I can track down the paper on it, but I remember reading a study on Native American indigenous populations and what contributed to resilience where it was there. And one of the things it talked about was using art to pass down that sense of identity and community, and such a powerful resource for that. But that idea of voice as well is so key. I mean, that's kind of at the core of good trauma-informed research as well, as well as research resilience. When a human feels heard, it makes such a difference in that sense of identity.
Oh, yeah.
Love it. I'm wondering if you could, I want to shift gears just slightly, although I think this builds on what we've been talking about. So for those that don't know, starting in 2018, you've hosted an annual summit that was focused on college access. And that's been a really big core piece on kind of your mission in the work you've done with Berea and otherwise. Wondered if you could just talk a little bit more about that, kind of specifically what the purpose of that has been. And then I know there's been of late a little bit of a change of focus within that summit. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what that change has been and what has driven that. I'll let you two decide what order you want to discuss that in.
Sure, it's my summit, but Hassan's been there from the beginning because he was one of those folks who kept telling me it wasn't a crazy idea, right? So around 2017, I decided that I was tired of going to all these national conferences and convenings, especially around college and access and success, because that's where I was working mostly at the time. And I was usually the only rural voice in the room, or our folks were, right? And somebody challenged me, and it may have been Hassan, who said, well, why don't you just hold your own convening? And we're like, okay, we can do this. And we actually pulled it together pretty quickly, the first one in Lexington, Kentucky. And it was starting out to be a summit for rural student college access and success. But what we've realized over the last couple of years, and especially coming through the pandemic, is that really college and post-secondary success, career success, often starts all the way back in kindergarten, right? And we know if kids are reading at third grade, their chances of graduating high school and going to college is so much higher, right? We also know if students enter kindergarten ready to learn. We also realize that in rural communities, often it's the same folks that are supporting these kids all the way from kindergarten through, and they see them off to post-secondary. So we've reframed it this year. It's a rural summit for cradle to career success. So we're going to focus, we've got a partnership with Save the Children, and they're bringing in some breakout sessions around early childhood and home visiting and how do you engage parents at that time. We'll have focus on that K-12 piece. We know that the community school model is one that works in rural places. You mentioned communities and schools. We've been running community schools in Appalachia for 10 years now, and we see that that's a framework that resonates in rural places with rural families and kids. So there'll be a strand on community schools. And then the post-secondary workforce, the education, that piece of it is, the culminating piece, right? It's all about career, right? I think sometimes we have to reclaim the word career because we get so fixated on college. But actually, the whole purpose of all the work that we're all doing is career and providing these young people with that pathway to economic mobility. So this year, it'll be the Rural Summit for Cradle to Career Success. It's in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're partnering with UNC Charlotte. One of their divisions is called Urban Core. And somebody's like, well, why are you partnering with a group called Urban Core to host a rural summit. And we're like, it's really about community and it's about engagement. And the work that Urban Corps has done there in Charlotte resonates and really applies to a lot of the work we're doing in rural America. So that's the summit. I think Mark put the link in there. It's a great place for people to get to know one another, to learn best practices. But I think the other piece is it starts to build community, because if we're going to change these national systems, we've got to learn how to work together from Appalachia to the Delta to the frontier, right? The whole country has to learn how, and we can model that piece. And Hassan, you've been at each summit, so I don't know if you want to chime in.
I think the most amazing part of the summit for me is visually. The first time I walked into a room and it was clearly a conversation on rural, but the idea of what rural was, it was immediately crushed, right? The stereotype of what rural is, right? When you had indigenous folks from Native communities and Native Alaskan communities, when you had, Black folk from rural South and the Delta, you had white folk in, lots of different communities, Appalachia in particular, you had Latino and Latinx folks, from all these folks. What we know is the demographic of rural is not the stereotype of rural. And what is so powerful when you start to see folk who have been told they should never be in the same conversation together, sitting down and going, yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. Yeah, us too. And saying we had to get together because, and so what's great, like this, the Dreamer talked about the three communities, right? You have indigenous young people of color from Louisiana. You have these young folk who are indigenous and white folk from rural Wyoming. You have these young folks from Appalachia who, again, it's a diverse mix. They're not all young white folks, right? Because, rural is not code for white. Rural is code for, these places that are separated and isolated so often. And this conversation that they're getting to have with each other. One of the groups wrote love letters to the other two groups, just introducing themselves and talking about the conversations they want to have. That was the thing that immediately, right, when Dreamer first mentioned this, and I said, well, if you're so mad people don't make it yourself, right? And she was like, okay. And that's the thing about Dreamer, I was to tell you, because when she started this work, right, she left law and this big practice, about to make partner, and came back to Berea to make, this $30,000 a year, her and his halftime secretary. And they say, if you want more, you're going to have to figure it out yourself. So there's the trick, right? If you tell her you're going to have to, if you want more, you're going to have to build it and just get out the way, right? And so those are the kind of conversations, though, right? When somebody is fired up and believes, and I think the Rural Summit is that impact point where all these pieces come together, and over the course of 2 or 3 days, you get to live out the true possibility of what it means to be connected instead of isolated in the story of rural, but connected in the story of rural, capital R, that captures so much of what our nation is and who we are as a nation. And that is what always, I'm a people person anyway. And so once we hit the ground there, it is all in, and it's such an exciting place to be. And those conversations are so rich when people start to see and realize that they really are aligned and experiencing things that they can support each other on and network and build community across these lines that were supposed to be lines of difference.
And I think one of the things that people often ask me is like, well, how do you define rural? And I'm like, we don't, right? If you think you're rural, or if you believe and you want to support rural communities, come join. I remember my colleagues from Alaska that very first year, they're like, okay, it was like, we're really rural because we take an airplane to get from school to school. And I'm like, okay, we're not going to get into that, right? We're all rural, and let's just self-identify. And so it is like this joke on the spectrum of what rural can be, because some rural communities might be within 45 minutes of a major metropolitan area, but because they are so isolated, usually by geography, but often by income and opportunity, they really are rural. So that was the other piece. So if you want to come and you consider yourself rural, come, you can be part of the group.
And I want to mention one of the things that we all know is that because so many of our young folk from rural, if we're doing our job, they go off into cities. And so we have large places like here in Kentucky, within 1 hour of all our rural places, there's a major city And there are country folk, right? You know, they still hold their tradition, they still hold their story, they still come back to the hills and the hollers on the weekends and on holidays. And so rural is not just a place, it is a part of who we are. When we leave the res, when we leave the hollers, when we leave the hills, right? It's still, and so I think being able to say that and let people own that without contradiction and challenge is a really powerful place for us to be.
I love that. One of the things I've been so grateful for in this role is so I oversee training for our organization, and it gives me the opportunity to go out and train and present at conferences regularly. And so I've been able to travel America, and I can't tell you how many times I've experienced just what you both described, where you literally can go 45 minutes from a major metropolitan area and feel like you're almost in a different state, completely different place. And so that's one of the awesome things I think about the work you're doing is helping kind of break some of those myths or some of those parameters that communities may put on themselves and start to see themselves different. And it does make me wonder as well. I'm wondering, you alluded to it a little bit, Dreama, but I'm wondering if you could maybe expand a little bit more on the advantage that has come from moving this summit over to Charlotte this year, and specifically how some of your partnerships there, maybe with Urban Core and some of the other ones you mentioned, have kind of assisted in furthering some of those things you've just talked about, because I think that's a key distinction. And I think it's an important move that you're making from a focus and organizational standpoint.
Yeah, and so one of the pieces is we really want to take the summit to a different rural region every year. And we know that Charlotte is a city, but we also know that to get folks to come in for a conference and for people to be able to really do it, we have to do it close to an airport. So we chose Charlotte. Last year we were in Scottsdale, Arizona, right? And we really had a lot of presenters, and we talked about Arizona, we talked about that region. Our virtual summit was in New Hampshire, and we talked a lot about New England and what rural looks there. So Charlotte, we're really looking at what is the rural South, right? And what are some of the areas there and some of the topics there that are so relevant. And so our partnership with Urban Core has helped us to connect in with a lot of the educators in the Carolinas, and they'll be presenting some of their own stories of what is relevant to them and what are the issues that are addressing them. The other interesting piece around the Cradle to Career is we've actually brought 2 presenting partners along with us. So it's no longer just Partners for Rural Impact. We're partnering with Save the Children, U.S. programs, and they're really taking and looking and cultivating partnerships and presenters around that birth to 5th grade part of the spectrum. Then Ascendium Education group is a funder, that one of the few funders that's really focused deeply on rural post-secondary and workforce. They've come on board as a presenting partner, and they're really cultivating and bringing partners in to talk about that transition from high school to post-secondary to career. And then we have a third presenting partner, which is Strive Together, who does collective impact and work deep in communities across the country. And they really are helping us think about the whole cradle to career. So what we've been able to do through these partnerships with Save the Children, Ascendium, and Strive Together is now we have these national organizations that we're committed to doing this every year, and holding that cradle to career lens. So I think it'll make the rooms a lot richer, and that there will be people working with kids across the spectrum, but also bringing in additional partners helps us because we have other people sort of carrying the load and helping us to plan the summit.
Awesome. Thank you. Anything else you want to mention as far as like, why is it important that what's important about these summits? I know I have my own opinion, but I think you have some unique insight as well.
Yeah, so I think with us, it's, for me, there's a couple of pieces that's important is we've got to continue to get to know each other as people to build community across the divides of rural America. We often bring in plenaries and even breakout sessions with folks who are doing work in urban America too, because the other thing I often say is, you know, my flag is in the ground for rural kids, but really what I'm working toward is an America where every child is supported and to success. It is not rural versus urban. We are standing in the gap for rural kids because no one else was, but we're partnering with groups like Strive Together, like Policy Link, and multiple others. And we bring those folks in to also present. And sometimes they're just in the room to learn, because the more that our urban partners can learn about rural America, the more they can support us. And then we're showing up in their rooms too. So I do think for me, it's people getting to know each other across rural America. And then the second piece of it is we do have a track on policy. So usually in most of the breakout times, and actually there'll be something around, you know, what's the funding and the resources for rural America, right? We've got the Department of Ed is coming in and doing something around promised neighborhood and community full service community school funding, right? And so we're using it as a way to bring in resources so that folks that are in rural America, you often don't know what's coming down the pike as far as resources and opportunities. So we also sort of infuse that. So I think for me, it's the community aspect, and it's how do we bring in resources that people then can take into their homes.
I love it. I love it. That's a piece we regularly get asked about, is how do we find the resources piece? And so I think that's such a vital element.
So a plug for something else we're doing. We're going to test it this summer. The other thing that we're looking at is, you know, we know there are programs that work in rural places. You know, we've got folks on here from Gear Up. We've got folks on here from community schools. We know the TRIO programs work, right? There are some college access and success programs that are very successful in rural America. One of the things that we're working to do this summer is pull together folks from across the country that are doing federally funded programs in rural places and we're thinking about doing like a rural hill day, right? We need to be visiting our legislators and not just talking about one program, but talking about all of these programs that work in rural America. So we're really working, and we're hoping this summer we can actually test that so we can have a hill day. And it's about all of these programs, because we don't need just a TRIO and just a Gear Up and just a Promised Neighborhood. Communities in rural America need all of those because they work together. So if anybody on here is real interested in that piece, they can connect with me, because we're trying to make that piece work.
I love it. By the way, we're going to put up a lot of links. We've had Mark throwing them in the chat, but we're going to put up a lot at the end, including contact information for Dreama and Hassan, if any of you have any follow-up questions to anything we've covered.
Oh, and Mark did just put up the other thing that we realized, and I forgot about this, and they would have killed me if I've forgotten this part. We know that libraries are critically important. Rural libraries, whether it's the public library or the libraries in the schools, are often sort of the thing that connects young people, especially in the summer and out of school time. I don't know what I would have done without the bookmobile in the summer library, right? And so we've started a network where we're inviting school librarians, public librarians from rural America to join the network. Once they join the network, and it's free, there's a link there. They join the network, they'll get invited to webinars. We're also working with some corporate sponsors, and there's potential of finding dollars then that we can send out to network members to support things in the schools. There have been some summer mini grants and things like that. So if you have partners that are school librarians or public librarians, share that link with them. And you know, that actually might be a really interesting future topic for you all to talk about, because we know the libraries are really on that front line of resilience, both with providing the supports to families, but also to kids especially during the summer.
I love it. I'm definitely going to make a note of that. That link's a little bit further up in the chat. It's about 3 comments up that Mark posted, called the Rural Library Network. Awesome plug for that. I want to shift gears very slightly now. I know we have on a lot of current practitioners, and one thing I've learned doing this is that our practitioners are always hungry for strategies, best practices, tips, anything you all could offer. I'm wondering if we could just go kind of back and forth a round or two and see if you have any tips, strategies, or best practices that you could throw out to a practitioner that they could start with, right now, right away, something that would potentially, help work towards accelerating educational outcomes or building community, connecting with resources, anything that you think might be, helpful if you were going to give kind of your immediate strategy toolkit to rural educators and practitioners. I'll let you pick whoever wants to go first out of the two of you. I think you just
Hassan,
got
go
called
first.
on, Hassan.
I think this is the story of my last 35 years. Gosh, I don't know that I can capture it all in less than 5 hours. I for me, especially working with practitioners and professionals in the last couple of years, as I've kind of expanded and involved that conversation. I think it's about and this relationship, right? They would say that all the time, but I don't mean just knowing people. I think that making the concerted effort to create spaces where young people feel known, loved, and inspired. And the idea that people who are poor, people who are navigating trauma, people who are engaged and struggling in so many ways still deserve more than just survival, right? And so the idea that you could create, especially in partnership with your students and the young folk you serve, conversations about what brings them joy and how we still get to joy, because we have a right, and this is my own speaking from that lens of poverty and challenge through all those things. My mother, who I call my hope dealer, HD1, hope dealer number one, she made sure that we paused out of our moving from house to house every couple of months and moving from school to school every semester or so to recognize and define joy. She created spaces for us to enjoy the things that other people enjoyed, going to the theater and experiencing, not the movie theater, but to see a play, and recognizing that even with all this chaos, where people look at you and say, well, you should just be trying to make sure you got 3 meals a day. Why are you wasting your money on that? She said, because you need to know that this is a place you have a right to be. And too often our young folk, especially in rural and expanded areas that are far from those metropolises, get the message. They don't get told, but they get the message that these aren't your places and you don't have the right to these. And I think that's such a disservice, because all of us are preparing our children for a whole world. And if they experience that whole world, many of them will realize that the best world they have was the one that they came from. But they need to have a right and the opportunity to make that decision. And so us giving them those things as gifts and experiences, I think, is one of the most amazing opportunities and experiences, things we could do.
So of course I'm going a different direction, right? So I think that's why we make such a good pair here. So I do think a piece for me is familiarize yourself with those resources that are out there that should be providing support to you in your work and to the students, and connect and sort of hold them accountable, right? So if you're working in school systems, if you're working, there are family engagement centers that are statewide in about 11 states that are providing resources on how do you get parents and families engaged. We're involved in one that we're rolling out in New Hampshire and Arkansas, but they're across. And then once those are up and rolling, they should have resources and things to provide to you. The same thing, there's regional education labs, we call them the RELs, that are there to support schools. And a lot of what they do, I think, is it's research and that, but they keep saying they want to be connected and being relevant, right? And do the work. So find the folks that are actually getting support and funding to support your schools and your kids, connect with them and say, hey, what do you have to offer us, right? We have that connection with young people, so you can be the conduit. The other piece that I think is really important is that there's no way that we as one person can do everything to ensure the success of one child. We can't even do that for our own children. right? With our own children, we have the coach, we have the doctor, we have the educator, we have the best friend, right? And we know and we surround them with that type of group. So I would say what has helped us in Appalachia is hiring folks that were from the place, that were serving kids, that they were in their community. But then they also started connecting with all those other folks and developing what we call that leadership table that's looking at the whole community and then identifying which child doesn't have somebody, right? So I think that's the other strategy, is realize you can't do it all by yourself. Invite others in and form that really strong community-based approach.
I love it.
The
Thank
other,
you.
yeah.
Go ahead.
And the other piece, I think, I'm surprised Hassan didn't do this. I think that, especially with young people now, it's the arts speak to them, but also technology speaks to them, right? So one of the things that helps Hassan and I keep more relevant is that we have children that are 18 and 23, and we listen to them, right? And we're saying, what are you listening to? What are you watching, right? I think the other piece as adults that are working with young people is we have to stay tuned in to what is relevant to them. And then we also have to make sure that in that circle of folks that we're building as the power team around young people, there are young people there because they know sort of that, they know what is relevant.
You want to add to that, Hassan?
You said that was going to be your closing? You had a typo there, hon.
I always have
sorry.
typos. I'm dyslexic. I
Well,
own it.
just to key off of a couple of things you said. First of all, art and technology, we don't have to separate. The art already of today and the art of tomorrow is going to be utilizing technology. So I think it can be both, and both have provide a powerful opportunity to express, to learn, to educate, to communicate, articulate things. And they also become integrated with culture in an important way. You know, when we consume art, we're also consuming culture. And then that hope piece, Hassan, I love that concept of hope dealer number one. I know that resonated with some people. I tell people in training all the time, and the research backs it, but you hope and resilience are fully connected. You cannot have one without the other. You can't be resilient if you don't have hope at the core. And then conversely, if you see hopelessness creeping into a person, to a kiddo, to a person that you're working with, that hopelessness will drive out the resilience. Hopelessness and resilience can't really coexist either. And so that concept of being a hope dealer, that becomes a resilience dealer as well. And that's really, really important. I love it.
And I think, and I know it's not my turn, Hassan, but I think I'm setting you up now so that you can add. But I do think a key piece too, Jason, is we have to take care of ourselves too. And so especially folks that are working directly with young people and helping them deal and process trauma, the whole idea of secondary trauma, and how do we make sure that we still have hope for the work we're doing. And Hassan spends a lot of time, a lot of the work he does with groups is, you know, with folks that are on that front line every day and reminding them to take care of themselves too.
Yeah. And that piece is so easy to forget, even more so after the last couple of years we've spent triaging children and families absolutely at the expense of ourselves. But, you know, if you can't write checks out of an empty account. Right. And so if we're not filling ourselves back up, if we're not making the time, right, for some self-reflection, to take a deep breath and maybe journal, the arts is a huge part of my life and my survival as a theater person. I've been performing my whole life and in writing, but being able to, that was the thing that helped me survive some of my most difficult childhood things, was being able to write and being encouraged to write. But if you're not finding that time, not just for self-care, but self-compassion, to give yourself permission on the days you go, I can't believe I don't like this, to say it's okay. You just like you tell your children, your students and your families, it's okay that you're not okay. It's okay for us to be not okay too. And to own that on the days we aren't, to refuel ourselves so that the next day we can strap on the armor, wade in, and hold that line between harm and hope, because that is the work we do best every day. And that is the thing that our children and these families need of us. And so we have to make that time for ourselves, because it's the only way we can be of the level of value we want to be for the folk we serve. And it's so easy to forget.
Amen to that. I want to have you speak here. We're coming up on an hour, but it's really important to me that you get this opportunity. You're both very generous in the voice that you represent and in the advocacy work that you do, meaning I think you allow yourselves to represent broadly, rural advocacy anywhere, but you also represent a community, a specific community, a community that has your heart, a community that you're part of, and it's a community that's been hit kind of hard of late. You represent Kentucky, and specifically, Eastern Kentucky's been hit hard with some natural disasters. I think a lot of people are aware of, but some people may not fully understand the devastating impact that it's had. I would feel like I was doing a disservice to your own community if I didn't ask you to represent your own soil there a little bit and just talk about the impact that those floods have had on students and some of the work that you've seen and that you've participated in.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Jason. And I will sort of preface it by saying, unfortunately, this experience isn't unique just to Appalachia. A lot of the communities in this nation that are areas of persistent poverty, where young people are facing poverty every day, also more and more are being hit by these disasters. So I think our flooding experience and going through it, we know it's happening across this nation. And we have to do something about it, right? That's part of that systemic piece, because the folks that are the most vulnerable are getting hit over and over and over. So last July, at the end of July, we all went to bed and everything was fine, but overnight there were unimaginable amounts of rain. And we call it the 1,000-year flood, because places that have never flooded before flooded. And if you think about Eastern Kentucky, it's a place that's been devastated by mining over the years, right? So there's also just these other pieces of this. So we had so many people lose their homes. We lost more than 30 folks that lost their lives. And when we think about like our own team, so we first started thinking about the team and the young people we work with. We had more than 40 folks that were independently, they were struck by it. We had folks who had to leave in the middle of the night with their children, right? And just walk out with nothing. So I think, again, it's not unique to Appalachia, but it brought it home to us that we have to be developing responses to this that actually are trauma informed, right? I mean, the first thing is you also have to make sure that FEMA can come in quickly and do their work, right? And so part of what we're looking at now systemically is in rural places, how can we document this recovery, but also ensure that FEMA is more aware of some of the geographic pieces. We had places that were flooded where we had to send folks in on horseback, right? Because nothing else you couldn't get to those communities. And then I think, schools, we have some schools that will need to be replaced. Others we're back in and they're open. But I think what really it showed us was that people care and people show up. Right. And, it might be interesting down the road. Celeste Wright, who leads our Gear Up work in Kentucky, she and her family were right in the heart of it. And she's actually started talking some about that. It might be interesting to bring on folks who've went through a natural disaster like this. And I say natural disaster, I don't think there's anything natural about it, but a disaster like this, because I do think other places around the country could learn from it. And they have to be prepared for it. But what we learned, one of the positive pieces is that all this work that we had been doing around trauma and around partnership paid off, right? Because there were people on the ground through Save the Children that were helping to feed kids. There were people going in and doing just everything, right? So it was really the positive that came out of it was the sense of community And all the work that we had been focusing on the schools started being turned toward the community. And I think it was a real positive. But yeah, I would definitely say, and I'm sure, we think about in Mississippi, there are people every day that don't have clean drinking water, right? I was talking to somebody in Maine yesterday about some tribal lands and beautiful, beautiful national parks where the people who are living there don't have water and sanitation services, right? So we've got to do better in this country around these type of things.
Amen to that. And, that idea I've heard you mention a couple of times, that idea of trauma built upon trauma. We know the impact that generational poverty has on people's mental health. And then when you add into that communities that may not be supported as they need to through these disasters, it just builds and builds and builds. And so this work and this support that you're doing is so important. Thank you. Let's do this. We are about out of time, and so I just have, I think, 2 last questions for you both. Number one, I just want to set you up with an open-ended question. I want you to share something that's given you hope right now. Back to that theme of hope. I think it's important. One of the important benefits of this type of community for me personally as a professional is you all provide me with hope. And so I'm wondering if you can share something to give our attendees to share, make that hope a little bit contagious. And then I'm going to ask you after that, just to share where people can find you, and we'll put up some contact links for everybody. But I'll let you choose who's going first. Tell me something that's giving you hope right now.
I'll go first. What's giving me hope right now is those teachers and educators and frontline folks that are showing up every day for young people and meeting them where they are. And I see that happening. And I am worried because I want them to take care of themselves too. But I mean, just that's what's giving me hope, is that there's people who are choosing this work and they're showing up every day and they're there for kids. Hassan?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. One of the things giving me hope is the conversations I'm starting to have more and more is getting broader. So I'm loving that I'm being invited to come in and work with teachers and administrators, but I'm also loving that I'm starting to hear from state probation officers saying we want our probation officers to have the same lens of hope when they engage with young people and adults who are coming through traumas of being system involved, and mental health and child welfare. And so that the idea of what is so naturally seen in education settings as the way we ought to engage, not just with students and children, but with people. Folk are starting to realize, or at least see, the value of carrying that same lens with everybody we engage with, right? We can engage with everyone that we connect with the lens of hope, humanity, optimism, perspective, and empathy, right? So that they feel known, loved, and inspired. The core piece I started with: dignity, belonging, and mattering. And all of us need more of that. If we had more of that, all of us would be able to give so much more to our communities and to the folk that we serve and the places that we love. And so I'm feel heart full with the conversations I'm having and the opportunities to really keep spreading that as a core theme.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I'll add mine. The thing that's given me hope is similar to what you said, Dreama. I feel so fortunate that I get to do what I do now at more of a macro level. And it's so easy to get beat down when you pay attention to the news cycle, or even just when you kind of vicariously hurt on behalf of some of the kiddos or the students or the families that you serve. And you look at things and go, this just isn't fair that a human should have to deal with this. And the thing that routinely cures my cynicism and just pours hope into my soul is when I go out and I meet with educators and mental health professionals and those frontline folk, this world still attracts the best of humanity, the best in us. These are, you all are incredible humans that show up and do this every day and every week and every month. And I always walk away from any training or any speaking engagement or any conference feeling so inspired, just seeing the authenticity of all of you that continue to do this, because we know that these kids deserve it, and their families deserve it. And so we go to work on their behalf, and that gives me so much hope. I want you to both share or plug any opportunity that you have coming up. I've got some contact information up here, and there's a lot there. I will say Hassan and Dreama are both very, very generous and genuine individuals. They mean it. If you want to reach out to them, shoot them an email, reach out on social media. Hassan, I know you also have a book that's either recently come out or coming out. Tell us where we can find you, what we should be looking at to keep an eye on stuff you have upcoming.
Sure. Well, I guess I have 4 books now. I wrote 2 more last year. So the first book is Written Off. It's my own journey through poverty, disability, and delinquency, navigating to become Commissioner of Juvenile Justice. A book called The Journey of York. It's a children's book about York, who was the only African-American member of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And as a side note, I'm actually I'm also an actor, and I have a one-man show that I've toured nationally for the last 20 years about York, and one about a Civil War soldier and Joe Louis, the boxer. And so I finally took that story and made it available to younger folks. It's an incredible story of resilience. I mean, that is so present in the conversation. And then all of the poetry I talked about writing to survive. I finally published a poetry book called Human Rights, WRITES, which, kind of chronicles and captures all of those pieces that I wrote, my survival words. And the last one is The Race. It's actually an epic picture book about a kid who escaped special ed class to go out and be with the other kids, and realizing that he's got a right to, if he's brave enough to go out there and try it, he's got a right to be there. And so it's one of my poems that we turned into a graphic illustrated novel, and it's been very popular with educators and folks who work with young people navigating difficulty. So, and it's one of those great gifts that people have been given to people who are getting past things, right? Remind you to keep fighting and don't give up. So I feel very blessed to have been able to write that. And Dream has always been a great support and encouraging me, to finally put down what's been in my head bouncing around. And so it's been great. And those things are all available on Amazon at some place. Amazon, it's a magic kingdom, I think. And and thanks for giving me a chance.
And I have no books, right? I have no books. I have nothing.
Well, she has 4 books. All those I just mentioned.
I was gonna say, I would imagine you might have you might show up either directly or indirectly through those books.
That's right. I always say I write grants, not books. So that's what I do. So yeah, thank you for having us. This has been a lot of fun. And
Dreama, plug the summit one more time. Tell people what dates it's at and where they should go to check it out.
Yeah, Mark has put the link there. Partners for Rural Impact. I always say Google it because I never remember, but it's the Partners for Rural Impact Rural Summit, April 2nd through the 4th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hassan will be there. Awesome. Christian from Y-Tri is coming down again. Yeah. And he and Hassan are doing a keynote together, which is always a lot of fun.
Yeah.
If you wanna treat, you gotta see it. It's our founder, Christian Moore. He and Hassan have similar energy. We're seeing Hassan exercise incredible restraint.
Lots of restraint. Today. I'm holding it in. Dreama told me
Hassan is one of the most incredible sources of energy and hope, and him and Christian are just magic when they're together. So definitely, if you can, show up and check that out. Hassan, I hope you're shopping around the rights to this one-man show, because I want to see the movie version of it. And also, I had no idea you had a poetry book, and I'm so pumped. I got to get my hands on it because poetry and music is so important to me. And I'm so excited to check that out.
Yeah. I got so excited when working, getting back to real work last year. I totally forgot to market either one of them. I was like, no, I'm going out to see people again. I can't do that anymore. I gotta. So Dream is trying to keep me balanced, and we're working on that this year.
So good. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. Give our panelists a huge virtual round of applause. Thank you to all of our attendees that showed up. We really appreciate you being here. We hope you'll keep showing up to our future webinars. And a big thanks to everybody involved. I hope you go out and have a great day, great week and weekend, and keep doing this good work. Appreciate you all. I'm gonna play us out with some music. Hassan and Dreama, you are welcome to stick around as long as you would like. And if you have to hop off, that's understandable as well.
Thank you, guys.